Thank you very much, Lucy, for introducing me. I know that the team behind me at TBLA would like to stress that we are a digital and cloud-based accounting practice, that it's growing fast, but we are attracting clients who are keen to work with service providers and suppliers that are carbon neutral and have a plan to reach net zero. So we're increasingly promoting the triple bottom line ethos, people, planet and prosperity, and the idea that purpose-led businesses solve rather than create problems for people and planet. It's a traditional accounting service practice, that offers a range of services from compliance and advisory as well. Okay, so what you've signed up for today is some definitions, some basic facts, and depending on the poll that we'll hold in a minute, I'll spend longer or shorter on each section, depending on the knowledge base of the audience today. What I really wanted to stress by the end of this session is the power of the narrative. Although we might be talking about measurements and target setting and improving our scores, I think if you're trying to inspire your own team, if you're trying to inspire your value chain, your clients, your customers, then the narrative goes a very, very long way. Okay, so moving on then. Who am I? Am I an expert on climate change? Well, I think you just heard that, no, I'm not. What I've done is I've informed myself, and this is one of the resources that I've used, and it's the UNCC eLearn platform. It has a number of modules, and this is just really the starter one that I'm showing here, which is from learning to action. It has really well-planned quizzes. You can't just memorize facts, you need to understand the facts to pass. And I've done this course twice because it was updated in 2020 to take account of the most recent science. I use lots of other areas, resources to make sure that I am informed, but I am a lay expert. I am not a scientist. Behind me, who will be hopefully answering some questions in the Q&A, I have Alasdair and Nigel, who are both decarbonisation consultants and specialists. There's also Thomas Gent, who has produced a certified soil carbon offset service from regenerative farms across the country, and is working hard to enhance carbon capture in the soil. And Peter, my husband, who's paving the way with his postdoctoral mission to bring the triple bottom line ethos into mainstream accounting education so that future accountants are climate ready. Why am I addressing SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, you might ask? Surely the big emitters are big industry, heavy industry, and the regulators should be national, local, even global governments and organisations. Well, I think you can see from this UN climate change conference graphic from this year, actually earlier this year, that business and industry are responsible for 25% of UK emissions. And actually, if you then look at how many SMEs there are, how many enterprises, how many employees are involved, and the revenue involved, then SMEs are part of this whole systems approach. So just under half of UK business emissions come from small and medium-sized enterprises. Okay, so you can see some facts on the screen, and I'm talking about facts. I'm not talking about believing in climate change. I think we've all gone beyond that stage. But I'd like to read out at the same time the remarks of Antonio Guterres at the Climate Action Summit in 2019, because they make me shiver, actually. So he said, "The climate emergency is a race we are losing, but it is a race we can win. The best science tells us that any temperature rise above 1.5 degrees centigrade will lead to major and irreversible damage to the ecosystems that support us. But science also tells us it is not too late. We can do it, but it will require fundamental transformations in all aspects of society: how we grow food, use land, fuel our transport, and power our economies. By acting together, we will leave no one behind. That was September 2019. So what I'm going to ask you to do now is I'd like to get a graphic of how we all feel about that. How, what are our emotions when people start talking about climate change? If you have a second device or a smartphone, you can literally just hold your camera up to the QR code and it will take you straight to a browser, to a link where you can just put 3 words in, up to 3 words, expressing your first emotion. When climate change is mentioned. If you don't have a second device, if you can go to your browser and pull up a new tab, you can put www.menti.com and then use this special code, which is 72549113. You can see it there on the slide. You should get the ability to put in your up to 3 words that express how you feel at this moment about climate change. I'd like to compare that with how we all feel at the end of the session. Now, hopefully you've all had time to make a note of where to go, because what I'm going to do next is just come out of the share mode, and Lucy is going to put up some polls that will enable me to capture the graphic. This is what we've got so far on the Mentimeter, and you can see that anxious and anxiety, helpless, frustration, challenged, overwhelmed, scared are the bigger words, but there's lots of words to do with confusion and uninformed, pessimistic, and many others, and we will share that with you all on LinkedIn so that you can have a look. There might be a few more coming in, so I'll probably update that graphic at the end of the session today. So we talked about, and we were just talking about, and thanks everyone for your patience, about parts per million. There's a link there to a lovely animation, 8-minute animation that really explains a brief history of carbon dioxide. So greenhouse gases cause global warming, and the global warming has been on the rise, and it's man-made. Obviously, there are differences in temperature over the millennia, but we can see a clear link between human activity. So what you can see on this slide here is that this rise has got to stay within 1.5 degrees centigrade. And the big learning curve for me was actually, hang on a minute, we're not talking about 1.5 from today, from now. We're talking about 1.5 from pre-industrial times. So if we've already warmed the planet by 1.19 degrees centigrade, and I'm just going to quickly ask Nigel if I've got that slightly wrong, please correct me in the chat, but I believe that we've only got about 0.31 degrees centigrade to so-called play with. Either way, we have got very little time to do something about it. So this is really all about collective action. Okay, and we can see that extreme heat occasions are happening now. We saw it a couple of weeks ago in Canada and West Pacific, and sudden deaths because the heat is just intolerable for the human body, but not just for the human body, for the whole ecology, for animals, for plants, etc. It is devastating. Okay, so this graphic is quite useful because we're talking about businesses today, and you can see a business as usual scenario by the end of the century, and you can see a much better scenario to the right, but it totally depends on what is described as aggressive mitigation. Okay, in that we need to start mitigating for the problems we've created now, and it is going to require radical change. And I know this is frightening, and I know this makes us anxious, but I've been hearing about a book called Willful Blindness, and we have to stop being willfully blind, and we have to all collectively spread this message and share it. So mitigation, what do I mean by that? Mitigating climate change is doing something to help reverse it, slow it down, stop it. Those sorts of actions. Stop burning fossil fuels is an obvious one. But alongside that, we need to be thinking about adaptation. Okay, so each country should by now, any country joining COP26 in November should have a national adaptation plan. But we need local adaptation plans right down to parish council, I think, very small localities, as well as, you know, our own individual ones, because some of these changes are going to happen in our lifetimes and we need to be ready for them. And that means not building on floodplains, you know, being aware of, you know, if you turn on the air conditioning when you've got an extreme heat situation and your air conditioning is powered by coal, then that's not really helping the situation. So adaptation and mitigation are both really, really important. So some of you said that you weren't too sure about what the greenhouse gases are. The most well-known one is carbon dioxide, and we all kind of know what that is. We breathe out carbon dioxide, and luckily plants and trees and vegetation breathe it in, and there's a natural equilibrium. But you know, CO2 is in the atmosphere naturally. The problem is that we've increased it due to human activity. So half of CO2 emitted is actually due to our, half of the CO2 emitted is absorbed in the biosphere and the oceans. But the rest, this is the key message, I think, the rest remains in the atmosphere for hundreds to thousands of years. So since 1750, CO2 in the atmosphere has increased by 40% due to man-made from human activity. So the other greenhouse gases, you can see slightly different percentages here, and that depends on the sources and how up to date the sources are we're looking at. But you can see the ratio is pretty much the same. Carbon dioxide is the most common and significant greenhouse gas in the atmosphere. The others are methane, nitrous oxide, and the other greenhouse gases include fluorinated gases that I want to talk about today. They're mainly the fluorinated gases. Water vapor is a greenhouse gas. Okay, so you know there are other things that we need to think about. If I had my notes in front of me, I'd be able to tell you very, very exactly what causes each one. But methane comes from all sorts of things, waste, and it stays in the atmosphere for over 50,000 years. So it's really scary. Carbon dioxide, hundreds and thousands, methane, 50,000 years. What are we going to do about that? It might not be so significant, but landfill sites, agriculture, burping cows, dairy farming, etc., are responsible for a lot of this methane. Nitrous oxide, things like fertilizer production, fluorinated gases, leaky fridges, and in fact the UK have just brought in a regulation that fluorinated gases can't be used in refrigeration, and it came into effect from January this year, but actually obviously we're all using our old fridges and they might be leaking. So they are the other greenhouse gases that we need to be aware of. The other thing is sort of looking at various pie charts, and this is just one example, where you can see the biggest sectors, the biggest emitters, agriculture, forestry and land use, you know, nearly a quarter of all emissions, as is electricity and heat production. And I think that's one of our problems. We might be greening the electricity grid, but we're still using, in this country, natural gas mainly for our heating, and whether that's in our businesses or in our homes. Industry, transportation, buildings, other energy, all make contributions. So the other thing that people wanted to know about was CO2e, CO2 or carbon dioxide equivalent. And this is just an easy way to measure our carbon emissions, because obviously it needs to include methane, nitrous oxide, fluorinated gases. So an easy way of describing this is that methane is equivalent to 25 tons of CO2. So 1 ton of methane is equivalent to 25 tons of CO2 emitted. So it has that value of 25 tons of CO2 equivalent. So it's just an easy way of making sure that we're taking account all the greenhouse gases. So if I was a refrigeration plant, then my main concern might actually be not the CO2, but, well, it will be the CO2, but the fluorinated gases. Some more definitions before we move on to the second part of this webinar, which is really about the triple bottom line story and how we created our narrative. Is, what do we mean by carbon neutral businesses, zero carbon businesses, net zero businesses? And it is confusing. So carbon neutral business could just be a business that has measured their emissions and offset them, and then they carry on as normal. Yeah, ideally they try to reduce them as well. We're a carbon neutral business at the moment, but we are working to reduce. Zero carbon businesses or organisations don't emit any CO2e emissions in the first place, and a net zero business, which is where triple bottom line would like to be as soon as possible, is where ideally we've reduced our emissions to zero, or as to near as zero as is physically possible, and then we offset to get a minus figure. So I'd like to do another little interactive moment using the chat. It's just one example of how we can all as individuals, but also as businesses, make an immediate impact. And it relies on these two facts in the orange and grey boxes here. So a typical resident of the UK has a footprint of 10 tonnes of CO2, an annual footprint of 10 tonnes of CO2e. And the world average is 5. Obviously, richer countries emit more than poorer countries as a general rule. And we need to get the world average down to 2 tonnes. Okay, so we have a big responsibility here. Now, if we think that 25% of all global climate emissions come from food and related industries, so food production, transportation, storage, etc. Okay, so just in the chat, could you just put in some ideas, please, as to what you think you could do as an individual or a business, or maybe what you're already doing that could make an immediate impact, apart from starving yourself and not eating any food, and we're not going to allow that. Okay, so I'm going to give you a couple of minutes, and I'm going to see if I can see the chat while you're doing that. Yeah. Lovely, I like that. Stop wasting food. Waste is such a big emitter. Meat and dairy, absolutely. Non-packaged products, yeah. You know, you just think about the whole industrial process of packaging and oil-based plastics and that sort of thing. Yeah, recycle more. Zero waste. Yeah, this is fantastic, and it sounds as though everybody knows, quite a lot about, the need to reduce our meat and dairy intake as much as possible, and also what's interesting. Buying local, and growing your own is what's interesting here is that waste has come up quite a lot, and if I just move on to my next slide, she says, having lost my cursor again. Food waste. An estimated 1/3 of all food produced in the world ends up as rubbish before it even gets to the table. So eating as much of the food as possible, finding out what you can do with vegetable and fruit peel, actually, and all the nutrients within them is one good way. Composting, food going into landfill produces a huge amount of methane and carbon dioxide. Using in the office, maybe installing a hot bin composter, and that way you can get rid of your shredded paper and cardboard packaging, as well as any food that is consumed in the building. So there's lots of things that you can do just to reduce food waste and make a big difference. This one seems to be something that everybody understands. Every kilogram of lamb or beef on a plate causes emissions of 15 to 30 kilograms of CO2, and that's many times higher than other protein sources. So it's estimated that if we all just went to an all-vegetarian diet, if not a totally plant-based diet, then we could halve our CO2 emissions that are related to food. I want to move on to the second part of this session, which is really talking about impact narratives and using my own company and my own experience, so what I know, as an example. And a question that came in before we started was one that I think is so important. The question was, how can leaders keep the rest of the team focused on emission reduction schemes over long periods of time? And I've used this graphic from the International Association of Public Participation because it really is down to this. It's about informing people. So doing what I'm doing now, these are the facts about climate change. This is what's happening. These are what we mean by greenhouse gases. Okay, and then consulting, getting people to come up with their own ideas. And at Triple Bottom Line, it was amazing how our team, from being a little bit reluctant, started to come up with some really, really good ideas about how we as a company could reduce our emissions once they were furnished with the facts. There's got to be collaboration, and collaboration with all your stakeholders. It might not just be your employees, it might be your clients, your customers, your suppliers, your local community, or the community where you have an impact as a business. And you have to have consent, empowering. If you empower people, then the momentum will just take care of itself. It's not easy. I'm not going to pretend it's easy. And you have to start slowly and keep working at it. So Alasdair Wilcock, who's here in the background, has partnered up with Triple Bottom Line, his consultancy Maple Cone. He is a decarbonisation expert and a very experienced business consultant. And his mantra is start by starting. It sounds a bit silly, but start simple. Work out within your team or with your stakeholders what's the most important thing to you, and start measuring and tracking that. We're talking about carbon emissions today, but we might be talking about social or governance impact as well. And then you build on that. You might do more accurate measurements. But as I keep saying, demonstrating what you've done, disseminate, share ideas, tell your stakeholders, write that narrative. And I know that also with us today is Charlie Watson, who helped me write the first Triple Bottom Line narrative and helped us write a little tool that is sort of like a basic guide to writing impact narratives. So I'm very grateful to Charlie for doing that and being here today. So we looked at things that we were doing really well and what we were proud of. We asked our team, well, what do you say to people when you say I work at Triple Bottom Line? What do you say you're proud of? And we like the fact that a huge section of our clients do come from the environment and sustainability sector. And we feel that we're probably a leader in this area. So my husband, Peter, is also working, he runs the company, but he's also working on accountancy education, not just at the Norwich Business School, where he teaches on the MBA, executive MBA, and he teaches taxation, but also with other universities, with the professional accountancy bodies and with other accountancy practices. So spreading this idea and working on it. And we're lucky to be based in the Enterprise Centre at the UEA, which was designed on Passive House principles. If you don't know about Passive House principles, do look them up. It helps us reduce our energy requirements considerably. So a little bit like the people in the Green New Deal, we believe that the twin challenges of inequality and climate crisis, you can't get a solution to one without a solution to the other, to be quite honest. So we believe that contributing to social justice by subsidising our not-for-profit clients who are helping vulnerable and underrepresented people within their communities will have an indirect but positive impact on mitigating the inevitable consequences of the climate emergency. So that's something, these are things that we were already doing that we were proud of, okay? Then we needed to get our narrative going. We needed to step up our game, so to speak. So yes, making sure that our employees understood the facts and that they could also walk the talk in sustainability behaviour. We gave them an incentive with climate perks, which means that they can have extra days leave every year if they choose to go on their annual or sometimes biannual holiday by land or sea rather than flying. And we encourage buying local, and we're lucky to have our website designer, Karen Black, who uses green hosting, and a data centre that uses 100% renewable energy. And yes, Karen is a super talented, Karen of halve, website designer, and she helps us keep it up to date. We started with a free carbon calculator, and I do recommend carbonfootprint.com for small businesses. There's a free version, and then there's one that you can pay for to add in a bit more detail. It told us at the beginning of 2020 that we were just emitting about 4 tonnes of carbon, and we knew that this couldn't be entirely accurate, but it gave us a figure to start with. We did a much more complicated carbon analysis with a startup that was being financed by Octopus Energy. And it was great because it took in all our purchases as well. So some of you said, or quite a lot of you said, you didn't really understand what scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions were referring to. Well, you can see all the different greenhouse gases at the top of this graphic. But basically, scope 1 is any emissions that you are creating at your premises. So for us, it's a little bit of gas that is burnt at the enterprise centre on very cold days in winter. Scope 2 for us, it's indirect, but it's the electricity we purchase. And actually, we still haven't been able to verify whether the electricity going into the enterprise centre is fully renewable, or whether it's got a fossil fuel mix. So we're not entirely sure if our scope 2 measurements are accurate, but we've done it on the basis that they might be fossil fuel to be sure. So the fuel is being burnt somewhere else, but you're using the power, the electricity. And scope 3 is basically everything else. And that includes the emissions from the suppliers you're purchasing from. So lots of different indirect downstream activities there. This graphic shows you, a breakdown of our scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions. We'd like to hope that our scope 2 are less than that. But I think you can see that scope 3 is where we really need to sort ourselves out. And so 13 tonnes of emissions, CO2e emissions in 2020, which is broken down to 1.8 tonnes per employee. And we have a problem here because we're growing rapidly. And as we employ more people, obviously our emissions are going to go up. So breaking it down by employee makes everything a little bit more manageable for us, while we encourage our employees on how they're going to commute to work, if they're working from home, how they're heating and powering their houses, and so on. We have another graphic here, which is a little bit more simple. And again, it shows us we needed to start with our purchases. That's, the area where we could have perhaps most impact. But we did also talk about home working and commuting as well. And this breakdown shows you our purchases. And I think our problem is that as a digital cloud-based accountancy practice, a lot of our emissions come from our suppliers, in the sense that we use a range of bookkeeping software, Xero, Free Agent, QuickBooks, for instance, which we buy on discount and pass on the discount to our clients. We use Dropbox, we use for cloud storage, secure Dropbox, we use Gmail, we use lots of other accounting platforms and other professional services. So legal e-sign for signing and that sort of thing. And this is what our problem is. We need to persuade these suppliers, or find out from these suppliers whether they have a plan for net zero, and if they haven't, be part of that sort of lobbying action to make sure they are, and in that way we will reduce our emissions as well. What did we do next? We used a gold standard offset. You can do an internet search for gold standard offsets. So they're verified by the United Nations. So we're offsetting our emissions for 2020, but we're also helping, in this case, developing countries to do something about theirs at the same time. But you can't just sin again, if you like, offset your emissions and then carry on sinning. You have to to get your carbon neutral status, you have to have an action plan. And this is where our team building exercise workshop with Alasdair came into effect. We actually agreed what we could do, and we agreed that by the end of 2020, we'd like to see at least 7% decrease, so that 1.8 tonnes per employee down to 1.6. And every year we need to be reducing that so that we have hopefully more than halved by 2030. I'm very conscious that we're getting to the last 15 minutes of this webinar. You can read our sustainable purchasing policy, where we came up with criteria for purchasing going forward. So we stopped buying from Amazon, for instance, because despite their recent adverts, we're not convinced that they are anywhere near carbon neutral. And Amazon Web Services, a subsidiary which is far more profitable than their deliveries, is using fossil fuel to power all sorts of cloud services, including, in fact, even the Guardian newspaper, for instance. So we've got certain criteria: waste minimisation, conservation of resources, buying local, and using bodies such as Ethical Consumer or the Carbon Disclosure Project to find out more. So, for instance, Dropbox hasn't even made a disclosure on the Carbon Disclosure Project, which is an international organisation, which kind of tells me they're not very proud of their carbon emissions, or they would. At least the last time I looked. I might find myself wrong if I check after this session. I haven't got time to go through the rest of our agreed actions, but I think I want to stress corporate climate advocacy, really lobbying our suppliers to make those changes. It will help us reduce our emissions, but it will help reduce global emissions. And you can read our fully detailed, quite scientific carbon footprint report via this link. Okay, so obviously, as individuals, we can make lots of powerful actions, and you mentioned many in the chat earlier, so thank you for that. Corporate climate advocacy is so important, and it's part of what I'm doing now. We made a fully published commitment to the SME Climate Hub, who have an amazing toolkit, and I do recommend anybody who doesn't know where to start, either come and talk to Alasdair and myself, and we'll help you, or use this free resource. And they talk about committing and setting a target, measuring and reporting emissions, coming up with a business strategy, reducing your emissions, reducing your value chain emissions, your scope 3 emissions, and contributing to climate action in society. And you get some free advertising, because we are one of 1,200 SMEs that, as of the June 21st, were on their website. So if you look under T, you'll find triple bottom line accounting. Some other resources that have either gone up in the chat, or you'll find if you'd like this set of slides, free carbon calculators. Peter, my husband, gave a really useful 10-minute talk a while back on replacing company cars and delivery vans with EVs, and actually the win-win situation of the tax benefits you get with that. And of course, you could pay us as your consultant to help you reduce your CO2 emissions. So coming to the end of my session here, and I encourage some questions. I'm sure you've put some questions in the chat. Haven't had a chance to look at them. That we have got this triple bottom line and maple cone environmental and social impact narrative service. It is a bit of a mouthful, but I hope it explains on the tin what we're doing. We know that SMEs are so busy just keeping afloat these days, just making sure that you're profitable enough to carry on, that it's hard to start this journey on climate change and carbon reduction. So we offer a service that's broken down into bite-sized chunks, and it will fit your timescales, your availability, your priorities, and we hope to make it as simple as possible. As I said, Charlie Watson helped me write our first impact narrative. It is completely out of date now, but it's an evolving and exciting story, and I will be updating it very soon. I'm going to leave you with two lovely quotes. Stephen Stone was a speaker on the course I did with the UNCCE Learn platform. He says, our collective consciousness is gradually altered by climate debates and movements. So I'm hoping that I'm contributing to that collective consciousness today. And then Christiana Figueres, who was a significant part of the Paris Climate Agreement, has written a book with Tom Rivett-Carnac, and she just says we can no longer afford the indulgence of feeling powerless. We've got to stop saying I can't do everything. We've all got to do something. And what I'm hoping is that where we put in the Mentimeter earlier, the sense of powerlessness, this sense of anxiety, that hopefully knowing what you can do can help reduce that anxiety, and knowing that we can make a difference as well. So again, in the chat, if you wouldn't mind just popping in, I kind of hope you feel a little bit better about it, but I know I've given you some scary facts. You might feel worse. So if you feel that your emotions have changed in any significant way, please let us know in the chat. Some useful links have been put in the chat, and we can share them with you later, but they are here. And fundamentally, that is the end of my session, and I'd like to open up the floor to any questions.
Thank you so much, Fran. That's incredible, really, very inspirational and very kind of practical as well. And thanks for the contributions in the chat. So yes, let's open it up. I think there's quite a lot to absorb there as well. That's a good comment from SME. Feels possible if we can all act together. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Esme. That's fantastic. Yeah, I just feel so proud that I managed to do it without my notes. I mean, I have been.
I meant to say that. You did not need your notes. Obviously passionate, and it's absolutely quite astonishing. What you've learned and how fluent you are, and everything like that. And it's such a great Norfolk example, really. So, that's fantastic. We certainly will be sending out all the slides, if that's okay with you, Fran. Is that all right?
Absolutely. I can't see any questions in the Q&A. Were there no questions that came up?
Makes me feel it's worth a small. This is great. Makes me feel it is worth even the small contribution we can make. And everyone wants the slides. This is fantastic. What I'm going to, somebody's raised their hand. Hi, Emma. Hi, Emma.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Certainly can.
Lovely.
Yeah, Emma, hi.
Hi.
I thought you were on the screen like magic.
No, just to say a big thank you, Fran. That was fantastic, really inspiring. And I work at the City Council in Norwich, so it ties with a lot of the stuff that we're looking at strategically. And obviously, we can we have sort of direct control of certain things, but as the council, our main role, I think, in this remit is obviously to help influence. We have our Norwich 2040 City Vision, which is a jointly owned vision for the city. And out of that, Chris Sargerson at the Chambers of Commerce has set up a Norwich Business Leaders Climate Group. So I just wondered if you were linked in with them at all.
Well, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Esme, because that group is not running as far as I know. And I'm very, very disappointed because I did attend the 2040 Vision back in November 2019. Yeah. I was really inspired and I felt really hopeful, and I asked to join that business leaders climate meetup, and I think there was one, Alasdair also, and it really concerns me. If it's happening, we don't know anything about it, and we don't know why we've dropped off. And if it isn't happening, why isn't it happening? And I don't think that City Council are aware of the fact that it's happening. And I am, to be honest, really, really concerned about that, because we need. I can see that Leon's put up that it will.
Can I just jump in on that?
Yeah.
So it is happening. I think COVID sort of stalled the momentum. There was a touch point meeting last July, but Chris is just in the process of pulling together some comms to go out again. So what I'll do is I will do an introduction between you and Chris again, just to connect you both up, if that's okay.
Brilliant. Nigel and Alasdair also were originally on the panel. So I think we'd all like to be linked in again if possible, because we think we've got some contributions to make. And I know I don't want to be negative, but we could have met up on Zoom. Everyone else was doing that. So yeah, it would be nice to get that going again.
Fantastic. I think this is great. Someone's made a lovely comment here that it's making this conversation usual and expected is a powerful thing. And I've believed that as well. This has been quite a very good platform to get people talking and at a very kind of like grassroots, but also, you know, Fran, you're actually doing it. You know, you're talking to other businesses from what you've done, which is really very, very good. I'm just trying to, I think the questions are really coming in the chat now, so I'm just trying to I was part of the business leaders panel, but we have only had one meeting so far. Well, people can sort of read all of this. Businesses could form teams to try out their ideas working with waste within the Norwich bid. More details. Absolutely. I think definitely something should come out of this. I'm absolutely delighted that, you know, we've had this kind of platform today. I'm going to post something this afternoon, just a kind of a neutral post on my LinkedIn. And please, I'd encourage all of you to sort of like connect on that and to share your ideas or your takeaways or whatever. Can 1 second? Oh, they're all coming in now. Can we afford to offset? We already have a lot of historic emissions to capture before we offset our future emissions. Whew.
I agree. I think offsetting's got a bad name, I think, because it does feel like a bit like a sin bin. I can go and fly across to the other side of the world and then I'll just plant some trees. And obviously planting some trees or doing what you're doing for offsetting is good. But it's good to double offset so that you offset your emissions and your past emissions if you can afford to do that. But also, it's that action plan to make a difference going forward as well. And absolutely right, there's some massive tipping points coming up. So we talked about methane and, you know, if the permafrost melts anymore, we're going to have a catastrophic amount of methane going into the atmosphere around the Arctic permafrost. So we need to understand the facts better, all of us, me included. I don't stop learning, you know, and feel that we can do something about it. So our, not just our future missions, absolutely right, but our past.
It's great to see Leon here today, Leon Davis. I'm meeting you, aren't I? He's going to show me the electric car, which is fantastic. And he's made some really interesting comments down here as well. I think people can read these. Can you see all of these, Fran? Do you want?
I can, yes, and we can save these as well, can't we? So that
we can print out these the chat, and yeah, it's all come in the chat, which is absolutely fine. Yes, I think we're getting there now. I did say we were going to finish at promptly at 1 o'clock. So first of all, I want to say, Fran, a big thank you. I know you put so much heart and preparation into this presentation, and you know it's been fantastic to hear about what you're doing and to inspire us all and to sort of help us start on that journey, and to bring contacts experts here. Thank you very much to our experts who joined today to back up Fran.
Thank you, everybody.
Do feel free to email me directly if you feel that you want to. There are opportunities here to develop things. Great to see Esme here, actually. Esme, you really must meet Fran. I know you're going to get on really well. So look out for the LinkedIn post. There's lots of new faces here who've actually said that they'd like to know a little bit about Norfolk Network and the work we do. So I will follow up, and hopefully maybe we can have some. I can set up some Zoom calls. So thank you so much for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much indeed. Bye for now.
Thank you, Lucy. Thank you, everybody, for coming along.